I found messages between my daughter-in-law and another man. I stayed silent. 2 weeks later, at their wedding, I handed my grandson a sealed envelope. When he read the words out loud, the hall went silent, and she nearly collapsed in front of everyone.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that day was the culmination of the most painful 2 weeks of my 68-year-old life. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when my world came crashing down. Kevin, my son, had brought Victoria over for our usual family dinner. At 32, Kevin still loved coming home for my pot roast, and Victoria, his fiancée of 8 months, had become a regular fixture at these gatherings. I'd grown quite fond of her, actually. She was charming, attentive, and seemed to genuinely care for Kevin. She called me Mom Carol and always insisted on helping with the dishes. That evening, as we were clearing the table, Victoria's phone started buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter. She was in the bathroom, and Kevin was outside bringing in firewood for the evening chill. The phone kept lighting up with message after message, the sound growing more irritating with each notification. "Victoria, your phone?" I called out, but she didn't respond. The buzzing continued, and finally, I glanced at the screen to see if it might be an emergency. What I saw made my blood run cold. The messages were from someone named Marcus, and the preview text that I could see without unlocking the phone was enough to make me sink into the nearest chair. "Can't wait to hold you again." And 2 more weeks and we'll be free. My hands started trembling as I stared at that screen. This couldn't be what it looked like. There had to be an explanation. But when Victoria emerged from the bathroom and saw me standing near her phone, something flickered across her face, just for a split second, before she smiled and said, "Oh, was someone trying to reach me?" "It seemed urgent," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. She picked up the phone, glanced at it, and her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "Just work stuff," she said casually, but I noticed how she angled the phone away from me as she typed her response. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, laughed when I was supposed to laugh, but inside, I felt like I was drowning. I kept watching Victoria, looking for signs that I had misunderstood, that there was an innocent explanation for what I'd seen, but she seemed different somehow, more animated, more affectionate with Kevin, as if she was performing for an audience. After they left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the dirty dishes, unable to move. 38 years of marriage to Kevin's father had taught me to recognize the signs of deception, though I'd never expected to need that knowledge when it came to my future daughter-in-law. The next few days were torture. I found myself analyzing every conversation I'd had with Victoria, every gesture, every comment about the wedding that was now just 13 days away. The wedding I'd helped plan, the wedding I'd contributed nearly $10,000 toward because I wanted Kevin's day to be perfect. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. But then I remembered the look on Victoria's face when she'd found me near her phone, guilty, panicked, quickly covered by that practiced smile. On Friday, Kevin called to ask if I wanted to go dress shopping with Victoria for her going-away outfit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Going away. If my suspicions were correct, she'd be going away all right. Just not where Kevin thought. "I'd love to," I told him, because I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. Victoria picked me up that Saturday morning in her little red Honda, looking radiant in a way that made my stomach churn. She chattered about wedding details, about how excited she was to marry Kevin, about what a wonderful mother-in-law I was going to be. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. We were at Nordstrom, looking at dresses when her phone rang. She glanced at it and her whole demeanor changed. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away from me toward the fitting rooms. "It's about the flowers," but I was close enough to hear her answer, and what she said wasn't about flowers at all. "I can't talk long. She's right here," Victoria whispered, but her voice carried in the quiet store. "Just 2 more weeks, Marcus. I know it's hard, but we have to be careful." I pretended to be absorbed in examining a blue dress, but my ears were straining to catch every word. "The ceremony is at 2, she continued. I'll text you when we're at the reception. Kevin will be distracted with all the family photos and toasts. We can finalize everything then. My knees went weak. I gripped the dress rack to steady myself as the full horror of what I was hearing sank in. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning something for the wedding day itself. When Victoria returned, she was all smiles again. Sorry about that. The florist is being so demanding about delivery times. I nodded and managed to say something appropriate, but inside, I was screaming. This woman was going to destroy my son's life, and she was using their wedding day to do it. That night, alone in my house, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Victoria directly. I wasn't going to tell Kevin what I'd overheard, at least not yet. Instead, I was going to find out exactly what she was planning, and then I was going to make sure she never had the chance to carry it out. The wedding was 12 days away, and I had work to do. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I hired a private investigator. Harold Brennan came highly recommended by my neighbor's divorce attorney, and when I met him at a coffee shop downtown, he didn't even blink when I explained my situation. Happens more than you'd think, he said matter-of-factly. People who think they can have their cake and eat it too. Usually doesn't end well for anyone involved. Within 3 days, Harold had confirmed my worst fears. Victoria Martinez wasn't even her real name. She was Victoria Sandoval, and she'd been married twice before, both marriages ending in messy divorces after she'd cleaned out joint accounts and disappeared. The man she'd been texting, Marcus, was her first husband, whom she'd never actually divorced. She's what we call a professional bride, Harold explained when he delivered his report. Targets men with stable finances and good hearts, plays the part until she can maximize the take, then disappears. Your son's not her first victim, and if this works out for her, he won't be her last. I sat in my car outside Harold's office, reading through photographs of Victoria with Marcus, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and copies of legal documents that proved she was still married to someone else. My son was about to marry a bigamist and a thief, and she was planning to rob him blind and disappear on what should have been the happiest day of his life. The wedding was now 8 days away, and every fiber of my being wanted to march over to Kevin's house and show him everything, but something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of how happy he'd looked when he'd proposed to her, or maybe it was the knowledge that he'd never forgive himself for being so thoroughly deceived. Whatever the reason, I knew that simply telling him wouldn't be enough. Victoria had manipulated him expertly for almost 2 years. She'd made him believe she was the love of his life, his soulmate, his future. If I just handed him a folder full of evidence, she'd find a way to explain it away, to make him doubt what he was seeing, to paint me as a jealous mother-in-law who couldn't accept her son's happiness. No, I needed something more. Something that would make the truth impossible to deny or explain away. That's when I thought about Tommy, Kevin's 10-year-old son from his first marriage. Tommy was going to be the ring bearer, and he was so excited about his special role in Daddy's wedding. He was such a bright, articulate child, always eager to help, always wanting to make the adults proud. And that's when the plan began to form in my mind. A plan that would ensure Victoria's deception was exposed in the most public, undeniable way possible. A plan that would save my son from the biggest mistake of his life, even if it meant breaking both our hearts in the process. 7 days until the wedding, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. The envelope was already taking shape in my mind, but little did I know that what I'd discovered was only the beginning of Victoria's web of lies. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence against Victoria. Harold had already done that beautifully. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal while my heart was breaking for Kevin every single day. 6 days before the wedding, Victoria called to ask if I wanted to come over and help address the thank you cards in advance. "I want to get ahead of things," she said in that sweet voice that now made my skin crawl. "You have such beautiful handwriting, Mom Carol." I said yes, of course, because I needed to see how she was behaving. I needed to understand just how deep this performance went. When I arrived at Kevin's house, the house he'd bought specifically because Victoria said she wanted somewhere we can build our future together, she greeted me with a warm hug and fresh-baked cookies. The domestic goddess act was in full swing. "Kevin's at work, And I thought this would be nice girl time, she said, leading me to the dining room where she'd set up stacks of cream-colored thank you cards and elegant pens. I can't believe we're actually doing this. Getting married. I sat down across from her and picked up a pen, my hands remarkably steady considering I wanted to throttle her. You must be so excited, I managed to say. Oh, I am. Kevin is he's everything I ever dreamed of in a husband. She was addressing an envelope to her cousin in Phoenix as she spoke, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. He's so kind, so generous. I feel like the luckiest woman in the world. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen those text messages, if I hadn't hired Harold, if I didn't know what I knew, I would have believed every word. She seemed genuinely happy, genuinely in love, but then her phone buzzed on the table between us. She glanced at it, and I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly before she flipped it face down. Telemarketer, she said with a laugh, but I'd caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Marcus. You know, Victoria, I said carefully, testing the waters. I keep thinking about how fast everything has moved between you and Kevin. Sometimes I worry you haven't had enough time to really get to know each other. Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing to write. When you know, she said. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Have you told Kevin much about your past relationships? Your family? This time the pause was longer. When she looked up at me, there was something different in her eyes. Why do you ask? I shrugged, trying to appear casual. Just mother-in-law curiosity, I suppose. Kevin mentioned your parents couldn't make it to the wedding because they're traveling in Europe. That's right. Her smile was still in place, but it felt forced now. They're on a river cruise. They were so disappointed they couldn't change their plans, but they'll meet Kevin soon after we get back from our honeymoon. I nodded and went back to addressing envelopes, but I was filing away every lie. Harold had already confirmed that Victoria's parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. There was no river cruise, no European vacation, no disappointed parents who would meet Kevin later. Her phone buzzed again. This time she grabbed it quickly and stood up. Excuse me just 1 second. Work emergency. She stepped into the kitchen, and I could hear her talking in low, urgent tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was nothing like the sweet voice she used with Kevin and me. This was sharp, frustrated, almost angry. When she came back, she was all smiles again. Sorry about that. Crisis averted. What kind of work do you do again? I asked, though I already knew from Harold's investigation that she was currently unemployed and living off Kevin's generosity. Marketing consulting, she said without missing a beat. I work with small businesses to improve their online presence. It's really rewarding helping people grow their dreams. Another lie, delivered with such conviction that I almost admired her skill. Almost. We worked in silence for a while, addressing envelopes to people who would witness what Victoria thought would be her greatest performance. Relatives who'd flown in from out of state, Kevin's college friends, neighbors and co-workers who'd watched Kevin slowly rebuild his life after his divorce from Tommy's mother. Kevin talks about Tommy's mother sometimes, I said, watching her reaction carefully. Sarah, he says they've worked hard to maintain a good co-parenting relationship. Victoria's pen pressed a little harder against the paper. Yes. Well, Sarah's been very accommodating about the whole situation. Accommodating about me becoming part of Tommy's life. Some ex-wives can be difficult about new relationships, but Sarah's been mature about it. I almost laughed at the irony. Sarah had indeed been mature about Victoria, mainly because she'd seen right through her from the beginning. She'd mentioned to Kevin more than once that something about Victoria didn't sit right with her, but Kevin had dismissed it as typical ex-wife jealousy. I'm sure Tommy will be so excited to have you as a stepmother, I said. Victoria's smile became genuine for the first time that afternoon. He's such a sweet boy, so smart and articulate for his age. Kevin's done an amazing job raising him. At least her affection for Tommy seemed real. That was something, I supposed. We finished the thank you cards just as Kevin arrived home from work. He bounded through the front door like a man walking on air, swept Victoria into his arms, and spun her around the kitchen. 5 more days, he announced, grinning like a teenager. 5 more days until I get to call you my wife. Victoria laughed and kissed him, and for a moment, watching them together, I felt a stab of doubt. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an explanation for everything Harold had found. Maybe Victoria really did love Kevin, and I was just a paranoid old woman who couldn't accept that her son had found happiness again. But then Victoria's phone rang, and I watched her face change. The joy flickered out like a candle being snuffed, replaced by something I could only describe as calculation. "I should take this," she said, glancing at the caller ID. "It's my dress designer, probably a last-minute fitting issue." She stepped onto the back patio to take the call, and Kevin turned to me with shining eyes. "Mom, I can't believe how lucky I am. She's perfect. Absolutely perfect." I looked at my son, my kind, trusting, generous son who'd been hurt so badly by his first marriage that he'd sworn he'd never risk his heart again. And I felt something harden inside my chest. "She seems to make you very happy," I said. "She does. She really does. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and can't believe this is real, that someone like her could love someone like me." Through the patio door, I could see Victoria pacing back and forth, her free hand gesturing animatedly as she spoke. Her body language was completely different from the serene, loving woman who'd been addressing thank you cards an hour earlier. "Kevin," I said carefully, "are you absolutely sure about this? I mean, it's such a big step, and you've only known each other for— Mom." He turned to face me fully, and his expression was gentle but firm. "I know you worry about me. I know my divorce from Sarah made you protective, but Victoria isn't Sarah. She's nothing like Sarah. She loves me for who I am, not who she wants me to become." The irony was crushing. Victoria didn't love him at all. She saw him as a mark, a target, a means to an end. And in 4 days, she was going to destroy him in front of everyone who mattered to him. "I just want you to be happy," I said, which was the absolute truth. "I am happy, Mom. Happier than I've been in years." Victoria came back inside then, all smiles again. "False alarm," she announced, just confirming the final details. That night, driving home through the quiet suburban streets, I made my final decision. I was going to go through with my plan, no matter how much it hurt Kevin in the short term, because the alternative, letting him marry this woman, letting her destroy him financially and emotionally before disappearing into the night, was unthinkable. I spent that evening crafting the letter that would go in the envelope. It had to be perfect, clear, factual, impossible to dismiss or explain away. I included copies of the most damaging photographs Harold had taken, bank records showing Victoria's pattern of financial manipulation with her previous victims, and documentation proving she was still legally married to Marcus. But the centerpiece was a transcript of the phone conversation Harold had recorded just 2 days earlier. Victoria and Marcus discussing their plans for the wedding day, how they would wait until after the ceremony to clean out Kevin's accounts, how they would be on a plane to Mexico before anyone realized what had happened. "The stupid fool still doesn't suspect anything," Victoria had laughed on the recording. "He's so grateful that someone like me would want him. It's almost too easy." Those words would haunt me forever, not just because of their cruelty, but because of how accurately they captured Kevin's vulnerable state of mind. He was so grateful. He did think he was lucky that Victoria wanted him, and she was using that gratitude, that damaged self-esteem from his first marriage, as a weapon against him. The envelope was thick with evidence, sealed and ready. On the outside, in my careful handwriting, I wrote, "To be read aloud during the ceremony when the officiant asks if anyone has objections." I called Tommy that night. He was at Sarah's house for the week, but he was bubbling with excitement about the wedding. "Grandma Carol, did you know I get to carry the rings? And I have a special tuxedo. And after the ceremony, Victoria says I can have extra cake." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. I have a special job for you on Saturday. Something very important." "Really? What is it?" "I'm going to give you an envelope to hold during the ceremony. When the minister asks if anyone objects to the marriage, I want you to stand up and read what's inside. Can you do that for me?" Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Why can't you read it yourself, Grandma?" "Because sometimes grown-ups need children to help them tell the truth. And you're so good at reading out loud." Remember how proud everyone was when you read that poem at school? I remember. Okay, I can do it. But what if it makes Daddy sad? My heart clenched. Sometimes we have to do things that make people sad in the moment, but help them in the long run. Do you understand? Like when you made me get a shot at the doctor's office? It hurt, but it kept me from getting sick? Exactly like that, sweetheart. Sometimes love means protecting people even when it's hard. 3 days until the wedding. The envelope was ready. Tommy knew his part. All I had to do now was watch Victoria continue her performance, knowing that in 72 hours, the curtain would finally fall. But as I hung up the phone that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to break my son's heart in order to save it. And I wondered if Kevin would ever forgive me for what I was about to do. 2 days before the wedding, Victoria called me in tears. "Mom, Carol, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to turn to." She sobbed into the phone. "My maid of honor just canceled. Her daughter has appendicitis and she has to stay in Seattle. I'm devastated." For a split second, I felt a pang of genuine sympathy. Then I remembered the recording of her laughing about Kevin being a stupid fool. And my heart hardened again. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Would you consider being my maid of honor? I know it's last minute, and I know you're already doing so much, but you're the closest thing to a mother I have now." The irony was suffocating. This woman who was planning to destroy my son in less than 48 hours was asking me to stand beside her at the altar, to be part of her elaborate deception. "I would be honored," I heard myself say. "Really? Oh, Mom, Carol, thank you so much. You're saving my wedding." I was saving something, all right, just not her wedding. That afternoon, I found myself in a bridal shop being fitted for a lavender dress that Victoria had chosen. The seamstress pinned and adjusted while Victoria fluttered around me, talking about how perfect everything was going to be. "I still can't believe how everything has come together," she gushed. "It's like a fairy tale, isn't it? The dress, the venue, the flowers, and Kevin. God, Kevin is just perfect." I watched her in the three-way mirror, noting how her eyes never quite met mine when she talked about Kevin. She was good, but she wasn't perfect. There were tiny tells, little cracks in the facade if you knew what to look for. "Tell me about your first wedding," I said suddenly. Victoria went very still. "My first wedding? You mentioned once that you'd been married before, briefly." The seamstress continued pinning the hem of my dress, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the small fitting room. "Oh, that?" Victoria waved dismissively. "It was a mistake. We were too young, too different. It ended amicably." Amicably. According to Harold's research, Victoria had emptied their joint savings account and disappeared while her first husband was at his father's funeral. "What was his name?" I pressed gently. "Does it matter?" Victoria's voice had an edge now. "That's all in the past. I'm focused on my future with Kevin, of course. I'm just curious about the woman who's about to become my daughter-in-law." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's nothing interesting about my past, Mom, Carol. I'm much more interested in talking about our future as a family." The seamstress finished with my dress, and as I changed back into my regular clothes, I could hear Victoria on her phone in the hallway. "I don't care what it takes," she was saying in a low, sharp voice. "Everything needs to be ready by Saturday evening. No, Sunday morning at the latest. I can't afford any delays." When I emerged from the dressing room, she was all smiles again. "Just confirming some honeymoon details," she said brightly. That evening, Kevin called to thank me for stepping in as Victoria's maid of honor. "You don't know what this means to her, Mom. She's been so stressed about everything being perfect, and when Jenny canceled, she just fell apart. Having you there, it means everything to both of us." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "I just want your wedding day to be memorable, sweetheart." "It will be, with you and Victoria and Tommy all there. It's going to be the best day of my life." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the envelope that would shatter his world. Inside were photographs of Victoria with Marcus taken just 3 days ago, bank records showing suspicious transfers from Kevin's account to an offshore account I was certain he didn't know existed, and that damning recording where she called him a fool. The worst part was a series of text messages Harold had intercepted between Victoria and Marcus. They weren't just planning to rob Kevin and disappear. They were planning to frame him for money laundering through his construction business, making it look like he'd been using company funds for illegal activities. By the time anyone figured out the truth, Victoria and Marcus would be long gone, and Kevin would be facing federal charges. She wasn't just going to break his heart and empty his bank accounts. She was going to destroy his reputation, his business, and possibly his freedom. The next morning, the day before the wedding, I woke up with a splitting headache and a stomach full of dread. I'd barely slept, running through my plan over and over again. Tommy knew what to do. The envelope was ready, but the weight of what I was about to do to my son was crushing me. Victoria called at 7 a.m., her voice breathless with excitement. "Mom, Carol! I can't sleep. I'm too excited. Can you come over and help me with some last-minute details? Kevin's at his bachelor party, and I'm going crazy sitting here alone." An hour later, I was back at Kevin's house, watching Victoria pack for the honeymoon she'd never take. She'd laid out beautiful sundresses, elegant evening wear, and a collection of bikinis that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "We're going to have such an amazing time in Belize," she chattered, holding up a flowing white dress. Kevin's never been anywhere tropical. He's so excited to try snorkeling. Kevin had always wanted to travel but never had the money after his divorce and child support payments. The fact that Victoria was using his dreams against him made my anger burn even hotter. "It sounds wonderful," I managed to say. "I have a confession," Victoria said, sitting down on the bed beside her suitcase. "I've never been this happy before. I mean, I thought I knew what love was, but with Kevin, it's different. He makes me want to be a better person." The performance was so convincing that for a moment, I almost believed her myself. Her eyes were bright with what looked like genuine tears, her voice soft with emotion. "He's a good man," I said carefully. "He is. He's so good. Sometimes I wonder what he sees in me. I mean, I know I'm not perfect. I have a past, like everyone does. But Kevin, he accepts me exactly as I am. He doesn't judge me for my mistakes. If only he knew what those mistakes were." Victoria's phone rang and she glanced at it with annoyance. "Work again. I swear they can't leave me alone for 5 minutes." She stepped out onto the patio to take the call, and I found myself alone with her suitcase and her belongings. Something compelled me to look closer at what she was packing. Hidden beneath the beautiful vacation clothes, I found a second passport. Not in the name Victoria Martinez, but Victoria Sandoval. And tucked inside the passport was a one-way ticket to Mexico City, departing Sunday morning. One way, for one person. My hands were shaking as I photographed the passport and ticket with my phone. This was it. The final proof that Victoria had no intention of coming back from her honeymoon with Kevin. I quickly put everything back the way I'd found it, and was sitting innocently on the bedroom chair when Victoria returned. "Crisis averted," she announced. "Just some client drama that couldn't wait until after the wedding. Is your work always so demanding?" "Only when you care about doing a good job," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. "But after tomorrow, I'm going to be Mrs. Kevin Harrison, and my priorities will be completely different." That afternoon, the rehearsal dinner was held at Kevin's favorite restaurant. The whole wedding party was there, along with close family and friends. Victoria played her role perfectly, gracious and charming, making sure to compliment everyone and express gratitude for their presence. I sat at the head table, wearing my rehearsal dinner dress and a smile that felt like it was carved from stone, watching this woman manipulate my son and his friends with effortless skill. "Let's have a toast," Kevin announced, standing up with his wine glass. "To Victoria, the most amazing woman I've ever met. Thank you for saying yes to spending the rest of your life with me." Everyone raised their glasses, and Victoria stood to kiss Kevin, her face glowing with apparent joy. "And thank you to Mom Carol," she added, turning to me with tears in her eyes, "for welcoming me into your family with such open arms. I never had a mother-in-law, but if I could have chosen one, it would have been you." The applause was warm and genuine, and I felt like the world's biggest fraud as I smiled and accepted their congratulations. After dinner, I found myself alone with Tommy while the adults mingled and laughed. "Grandma Carol," he whispered, tugging on my sleeve. I still have the envelope you gave me. Are you sure you want me to read it tomorrow? I knelt down to his level, looking into his serious 10-year-old eyes. I'm sure, sweetheart. But it's going to be hard for everyone, especially your daddy. Can you be brave? Tommy nodded solemnly. I can be brave. But what if Daddy gets mad at me? He might be upset at first, but he'll understand later that you were helping him. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it hurts. Like when I told you I broke your vase instead of letting you think the cat did it? Exactly like that. Tommy hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma Carol. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything one more time. The envelope contained enough evidence to expose Victoria completely. Harold's photographs, bank records, the recording of her confession, and now the one-way ticket I'd discovered that afternoon. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Kevin would stand at the altar thinking he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. Victoria would stand beside him knowing she was about to commit the perfect crime. And I would be there as her maid of honor, watching the whole charade unfold until the moment when Tommy stood up and shattered every illusion. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Thanks for everything, Mom. Having you as my maid of honor tomorrow means the world to Victoria. I love you. I stared at that message until the words blurred through my tears. In 14 hours, Kevin would hate me. He would think I'd orchestrated the most cruel public humiliation possible. He wouldn't understand that I'd done it out of love, to save him from something infinitely worse. But I would rather have my son hate me and be safe than love me and be destroyed. The wedding was tomorrow, and I was ready to sacrifice everything to protect the child I'd raised, even if it meant becoming the villain in his story. The alarm was set for 6 a.m. The dress was hanging in my closet. The envelope was in Tommy's hands. All that was left was to play my part in Victoria's final performance, knowing that it would end not with a kiss, but with the truth that would set my son free. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, 30 minutes before my alarm was set to go off. My stomach was churning with a mixture of dread and determination that made it impossible to lie still any longer. Today was Kevin's wedding day. Today was the day I would destroy my son's happiness to save his life. I made coffee with hands that trembled slightly and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to call Kevin, to warn him, to find some other way, but I knew Victoria too well by now. She would have an explanation for everything, a way to turn Kevin against me, to make him choose between his manipulative fiancée and his paranoid mother. No, the only way this would work was if the truth came out publicly, undeniably, in front of everyone who mattered to Kevin. It had to be devastating enough that Victoria couldn't talk her way out of it. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But I was her maid of honor now. I had a role to play. "Good morning, bride," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Mom Carol." Victoria's voice was breathless with excitement. "I can't believe it's finally here. I'm getting married today." "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Nervous, excited, happy, everything all at once. I barely slept last night. I kept thinking about how lucky I am to have found Kevin, and how lucky I am to have you as my new mom. The words twisted in my stomach like a knife. Even now, hours before she planned to destroy my son's life, she was still performing this loving daughter-in-law act. "I feel lucky too," I lied. "What time do you need me there? Could you come over around 9? The hair and makeup people will be here at 10, and I thought we could have some quiet time together first. Just the two of us." "Of course. I'll see you soon." After I hung up, I sat in my empty kitchen and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry. I cried for Kevin's innocence, for the trust he was about to lose, for the family unit that would be shattered in a few hours. I cried for the woman I thought Victoria was, the daughter-in-law I'd grown to love who never actually existed. Then I dried my eyes, got dressed, and prepared to play the most important role of my life. Victoria answered the door in a silk robe, her hair in curlers, looking radiant despite claiming she hadn't slept. She hugged me tightly, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume that Kevin had probably bought her. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, leading me into the kitchen where she'd laid out a breakfast spread that looked like something from a magazine. I wanted us to have this time together before everything gets crazy. We sat at Kevin's kitchen table, picking at croissants and fresh fruit, while Victoria chattered about last-minute details. She seemed genuinely excited, genuinely happy, and for the 100th time, I wondered how someone could be such a convincing actress. "Can I tell you something?" Victoria said suddenly, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Of course. I was so nervous about meeting you when Kevin first brought me home. I'd never had a real family before, and I was terrified you wouldn't like me." I nearly choked on my coffee. "You were nervous about meeting me?" "Terrified," she laughed. "Kevin talks about you constantly. My mom this, my mom that. You're so important to him, and I knew that if you didn't approve of me, it would never work between us." The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly done. She was painting herself as the insecure girlfriend seeking approval, when in reality she was a predator who had targeted my son specifically for his vulnerabilities. "Well, you certainly won me over," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Did I? Really?" Victoria's eyes filled with tears that looked genuine. "Because these past 2 years have been the happiest of my life. Not just because of Kevin, but because of you too. I finally know what it feels like to have a mother who cares about me." I had to look away from her face, focusing instead on my coffee cup. The worst part was that some tiny piece of me still wanted to believe her, still hoped that maybe I was wrong about everything. "Tell me about your real mother," I said quietly. Victoria went very still. "What do you mean?" "You've never really talked about her. Just mentioned that your parents are traveling in Europe. There's not much to say. We weren't close." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us, and finally Victoria continued. "She died when I was young. Car accident. I was raised by my grandmother after that." Another lie. Harold had found Victoria's mother alive and well, living in a nursing home in Tucson, suffering from dementia. Victoria hadn't visited her in over 3 years. "I'm sorry," I said. "That must have been very difficult." "It was. Maybe that's why your acceptance means so much to me. I never had that maternal love growing up." The irony was crushing. She was using my own maternal instincts against me even now. At 9:45, the hair and makeup team arrived, transforming Kevin's house into a bustling salon. Victoria became the center of attention, laughing and chatting with the stylists while they worked their magic. I watched from the sidelines as she was transformed into a perfect bride. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her makeup was flawless, and when she finally put on her wedding dress, she looked like something from a fairy tale. "Oh my God, Victoria," breathed the makeup artist. "You look absolutely stunning." And she did. She looked radiant, beautiful, like a woman in love preparing for the most important day of her life. If I hadn't known what I knew, if I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I would have believed completely in this vision of bridal happiness. My own transformation was more subdued. The lavender dress fit perfectly. My gray hair was styled into a soft chignon, and my makeup was elegant but understated. I looked like what I was supposed to be, the proud mother-in-law, honored to stand beside the bride on her special day. At 12:30, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at it, and her expression flickered for just a moment before she smiled. "Excuse me, ladies. Just a quick work call." She stepped into the bedroom and closed the door. Through the thin walls, I could hear her voice, though I couldn't make out the words. But her tone was sharp, urgent, nothing like the joyful bride who'd been laughing with the stylists moments before. When she emerged 5 minutes later, she was all smiles again. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Perfect. Just confirming some details for Monday." The day she and Marcus planned to be on a plane to Mexico while Kevin discovered his empty bank accounts and the federal investigators knocked on his door. At 1:15, we loaded into the limousine that would take us to the church. Victoria sat beside me, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand, talking about how perfect everything was, how happy she was, how grateful she felt. "I keep thinking about our future," she said as we drove through the familiar streets of Kevin's neighborhood. "Kevin wants to expand his business, maybe even franchise it, and I'd love to have children with him someday. Little brothers or sisters for Tommy. Children." She was talking about having children with a man she planned to frame for federal crimes. That sounds wonderful, I managed to say. Do you think Kevin will be a good father to our children? I mean, I know he's amazing with Tommy, but sometimes I worry that he's too soft, too trusting. She'd identified Kevin's greatest strength and turned it into his greatest weakness. Kevin is one of the most loving, devoted fathers I've ever known, I said firmly. You're right. I'm just nervous, I guess. Pre-wedding jitters. The church came into view, a beautiful stone building where Kevin had been baptized, where we'd attended services throughout his childhood, where he'd married Sarah 10 years ago. The irony of this sacred place being the setting for Victoria's ultimate deception wasn't lost on me. We're here, Victoria said, her voice full of wonder. I can't believe we're actually here. As we pulled up to the church, I could see guests arriving, friends and family members dressed in their finest clothes, all here to celebrate what they believed was Kevin's happy ending. Inside the church, I helped Victoria with final touches to her dress and veil. She looked absolutely perfect, every inch the radiant bride. Mom Carol, she said, taking my hands in hers, thank you for everything, for welcoming me into your family, for being here today, for being the mother I never had. I love you so much. Looking into her eyes, seeing what appeared to be genuine emotion, genuine gratitude, I felt my resolve waver for just a moment. What if I was wrong? What if there was some explanation for everything Harold had found? But then I thought about the recording of her laughing as she called Kevin a fool. I thought about the one-way ticket to Mexico hidden in her suitcase. I thought about the federal charges she planned to frame him with. I love you too, I whispered back, and I realized that in some twisted way, it was true. I loved the woman I thought she was. I mourned for that woman who never actually existed. At 1:50, the wedding coordinator appeared in the bridal suite. Ladies, it's time. The ceremony starts in 10 minutes. Victoria took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror one final time. I'm ready, she said, but she wasn't ready for what was about to happen. None of us were. As we lined up in the hallway outside the sanctuary, I caught a glimpse of the congregation through the partially open doors. Kevin stood at the altar in his black tuxedo, looking happier than I'd seen him in years. Tommy was beside him in his miniature tux, clutching the ring pillow and beaming with excitement. My grandson had the envelope. In less than 10 minutes, when the officiant asked if anyone objected to this marriage, Tommy would stand up and read the words that would destroy everything Victoria had built. The organ music began to play, and Victoria squeezed my hand one last time. This is it, she whispered. The beginning of my new life. She had no idea how right she was. The sanctuary was packed with everyone Kevin held dear. His college fraternity brothers sat in the third row, grinning and adjusting their ties. His business partners and their wives filled the left side of the church. Sarah, Tommy's mother, sat near the back with her new husband, looking genuinely happy for Kevin, despite their complicated history. I walked down the aisle first, my heart pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. Kevin smiled at me from the altar, his eyes bright with joy and gratitude. He mouthed, "Thank you," as I took my place, and I had to look away before the tears started. The wedding march began, and every head in the church turned toward the back. Victoria appeared in the doorway like a vision, her dress flowing behind her, her face radiant with what looked like pure happiness. Kevin's expression was one of absolute awe, as if he couldn't believe someone so beautiful was walking toward him. She glided down the aisle with perfect grace, nodding to guests, her smile never wavering. When she reached the altar, Kevin took her hands and whispered something that made her laugh softly. They looked like the perfect couple, like two people who had found their soulmate. Pastor Mitchell, who had baptized Kevin and performed his first wedding, began the ceremony with his warm, familiar voice. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Kevin Michael Harrison and Victoria Elena Martinez in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond built on trust, honesty, and unconditional love. Trust and honesty. I felt sick. The ceremony proceeded exactly as rehearsed. Kevin and Victoria exchanged the vows they had written for each other, their voices strong and clear, their eyes locked on one another. "Victoria," Kevin said, his voice thick with emotion, "you came into my life when I thought I was finished with love. You taught me that second chances are real, that hearts can heal. that trust can be rebuilt. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." Victoria's response was equally beautiful, equally heartfelt, equally false. "Kevin, you showed me what real love looks like. You accepted my past without judgment and helped me believe I deserved a future filled with happiness. I promise to stand by your side through everything life brings us, to be your partner in all things, and to love you more with each passing day." The words were beautiful, delivered with perfect sincerity, and they were all lies. Tommy stepped forward with the rings, beaming with pride at his important role. Kevin ruffled his son's hair affectionately before taking the rings, and my heart clenched watching this tender moment between father and son, knowing what was about to happen. Pastor Mitchell blessed the rings and handed them back to Kevin and Victoria. They slipped them onto each other's fingers, their smiles bright enough to light up the entire church. "The rings you have just exchanged are symbols of unending love and commitment," Pastor Mitchell said. "Let them remind you daily of the promises you have made here today." And then came the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. If there is anyone present who knows of any lawful reason why Kevin and Victoria should not be joined in marriage, Pastor Mitchell announced in his ceremonial voice, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." The church fell into the traditional expectant silence. This was always a formality, a holdover from older times when marriages were more about legal contracts than love. No one ever actually stood up during this moment. But Tommy did. My 10-year-old grandson, looking impossibly small in his black tuxedo, stood up from his seat in the front pew. Every head in the church turned toward him in surprise and confusion. "Tommy," Kevin said, his voice gentle but puzzled. "What are you doing, buddy?" Tommy looked back at me, and I nodded encouragingly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I had given him, his young hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "Grandma Carol asked me to read this," Tommy announced in his clear, strong voice that carried throughout the silent sanctuary. "Tommy, sweetie," Victoria said, her voice still sweet but with an undercurrent of panic. "This isn't the right time. Why don't you sit down and we can—" "Let him speak," Kevin said, though he looked confused and concerned. "What is it, son?" Tommy opened the envelope and pulled out the letter I had written. His reading had improved dramatically in the past year, and I knew he could handle the words I had chosen carefully for exactly this moment. "Dear Kevin and wedding guests," Tommy began, his voice carrying clearly through the church's sound system thanks to the microphone Pastor Mitchell wore. "I am sorry to interrupt this ceremony, but there are things about Victoria that you need to know before it's too late." The murmur that went through the congregation was like a wave. Victoria's face went pale beneath her makeup, but she maintained her smile. "Tommy, stop," she said more firmly now. "This isn't appropriate." But Tommy continued reading, just as I had taught him to do when he encountered interruptions during his school presentations. "Victoria's real name is Victoria Sandoval, and she is still married to a man named Marcus Delacroix. She cannot legally marry Kevin today because she never divorced her first husband." The murmur became a gasp. Kevin's face went white, and he looked from Tommy to Victoria in shock. "That's not true," Victoria said quickly, but her voice was shaking now. "This is some kind of misunderstanding. Kevin, you know me. You know I would never—" "Victoria has been stealing money from Kevin's business accounts," Tommy continued, his young voice cutting through her protests. "She has moved almost $50,000 to secret accounts that Kevin doesn't know about." "Stop him," Victoria said desperately, turning to Kevin. "Make him stop. This is crazy. Someone is trying to ruin our wedding." But Kevin was staring at Tommy with growing horror, and the congregation was hanging on every word. "Victoria is planning to leave Kevin tomorrow and fly to Mexico with Marcus," Tommy read. "She will take all of Kevin's money and leave him in trouble with the police for crimes he didn't do." The church erupted. Guests were standing, talking loudly, looking back and forth between Tommy and Victoria. Sarah had moved closer to the front, her face filled with concern for Kevin and pride for Tommy's courage. "These are lies!" Victoria shouted, her composure finally cracking completely. "Someone is trying to destroy me. Kevin, you have to believe me." But Kevin was looking at his son with dawning understanding. Tommy was many things, but he was not a liar, and the specific details he was reading weren't things a 10-year-old could have made up. "Tommy," Kevin said quietly, "where did you get that letter?" Tommy looked back at me again, and I knew the moment had come for me to face the consequences of my actions. "I wrote it," I said, stepping forward from my position as maid of honor. "Every word is true." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin stared at me with an expression of betrayal so deep it nearly brought me to my knees. "Mom," he whispered, "what have you done?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder of evidence Harold had compiled. "I have proof, Kevin. Photographs, bank records, recorded conversations. Victoria is not who you think she is." "You're lying," Victoria said, but she was backing away from the altar now, her perfect wedding facade crumbling. "This is some sick fantasy. Kevin, don't listen to her. She's jealous because she can't stand that you love someone more than her." I opened the folder and pulled out the photograph Harold had taken of Victoria with Marcus just 4 days ago. They were kissing outside a hotel downtown, her engagement ring clearly visible on her hand. "This was taken on Tuesday," I said, holding it up so Kevin could see, "while you were at work, believing you were marrying a woman who loved you." Kevin took the photograph with hands that were shaking. His face cycled through emotions: disbelief, recognition, devastation, rage. "Victoria," he said, his voice barely audible, "tell me this isn't you." Victoria looked at the photograph and something died in her eyes. The performance was over. The mask finally slipped completely away. "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice cold now, nothing like the loving woman who had been reciting vows just minutes ago. "You're pathetic, Kevin. You always were." "A lonely, desperate man who was so grateful that someone like me would want him that you never asked the right questions." The congregation gasped at the venom in her voice. This was the real Victoria, the one I had heard on Harold's recordings. "You made this too easy," she continued, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. "Poor little Kevin, so damaged by his first marriage, so eager to believe in love again. Do you have any idea how simple it was to manipulate you?" Kevin stood frozen, the photograph still in his hands, staring at the woman he thought he knew. "The money," he said finally. "You took money from my accounts." Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "I took what I earned for 2 years of pretending to love you. Do you know how exhausting it is to fake affection for someone like you? Someone so needy, so desperate for validation?" That's when Kevin's shock turned to anger. His face flushed red, and he stepped toward Victoria. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my church. Get out of my life." "Gladly," Victoria said, gathering her wedding dress around her. This whole charade was getting boring anyway. She turned to walk down the aisle, but Pastor Mitchell's voice stopped her. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave just yet," he said. "The police are waiting outside." Victoria spun around, her eyes wide with panic for the first time. "Police?" I stepped forward again. "I called them this morning after Tommy and I arrived at the church. Bigamy is a felony, Victoria. So is theft and fraud. They have warrants for both you and Marcus." As if on cue, 2 uniformed officers appeared at the back of the church. Victoria looked around desperately, like a trapped animal, but there was nowhere to go. "You can't do this to me," she said, but the fight was going out of her voice. "You did it to yourself," I replied quietly. As the officers approached Victoria to place her under arrest, she looked back at Kevin one last time. "I hope she was worth it," she spat. "I hope your precious mommy was worth losing the best thing that ever happened to you." But Kevin wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was looking at Tommy, who had moved to stand beside me, still clutching the empty envelope. "Thank you," Kevin said to his son, his voice thick with emotion. "You were very brave today." Then he looked at me, and I braced myself for the anger, the accusation, the blame I deserved. Instead, he stepped forward and pulled me into his arms. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered against my hair. "I'm sorry I didn't see it myself." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, her wedding dress trailing behind her, the congregation slowly began to file out of the church. Some looked shocked, others relieved, but most looked at Kevin with sympathy and support. The wedding was over, but somehow, Standing there with my son's arms around me and my grandson pressed against my side, I felt like we had all been saved. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for my family. The simple act of setting the table for 4, Kevin, Tommy, Sarah, and myself, filled me with a peace I hadn't expected to feel again. The weeks following the wedding had been difficult. Kevin had to deal with the legal aftermath of Victoria's crimes, the media attention from her arrest, and the emotional devastation of learning that the woman he'd planned to spend his life with had never existed at all. The FBI investigation revealed that Victoria and Marcus had been running their marriage scam for over 8 years, targeting lonely men with stable incomes and good hearts. Kevin was their most successful mark to date, and if my plan hadn't worked, he would have lost everything: his business, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. The hardest part, Kevin had told me during one of our long talks in those early weeks, isn't that she didn't love me. It's that I was so desperate to be loved that I ignored every red flag. I made myself an easy target. I'd held his hand across my kitchen table, the same table where I'd agonized over whether to expose Victoria's lies. "You trusted someone you loved," I'd said. "That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The legal proceedings had been swift. Victoria pleaded guilty to bigamy, fraud, and money laundering in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was serving 4 years in federal prison, while Marcus had received 6 years for his role as the mastermind of their operation. The money Victoria had stolen was recovered and returned to Kevin's accounts. His business, which she had tried to implicate in fictional money laundering schemes, was cleared of any wrongdoing. Most importantly, Kevin himself emerged from the ordeal legally and financially unscathed. Emotionally, however, it had taken months for him to heal. "I keep thinking about all the lies," he had confided to me one evening while Tommy was at baseball practice. Not just the big ones about being married to Marcus or stealing money. The little ones, too. Her favorite color, her childhood memories, her dreams for the future. All of it was calculated to make me fall in love with someone who never existed. I had learned from the FBI investigation just how calculated Victoria's deception had been. She had researched Kevin for weeks before their supposedly chance meeting at a coffee shop. She knew about his divorce, his struggle with trust, his desire to provide a stable home for Tommy. She had crafted her entire persona specifically to appeal to his vulnerabilities. "She told me she loved children and wanted to be a stepmother to Tommy," Kevin had said, his voice full of pain. "She said she'd never felt maternal instincts before, but that Tommy brought them out in her. It was all lies designed to make me think she was perfect for our family." But there had been healing, too, particularly in Kevin's relationship with Tommy. "Dad," Tommy had said one day while they were throwing a baseball in the backyard, "I'm sorry I had to read that letter at your wedding. I didn't want to make you sad." Kevin had knelt down to Tommy's level, just as I had done when explaining the situation months earlier. "You saved me, buddy. You and Grandma Carol saved our whole family. I will never be anything but grateful for your courage. But you were going to marry Victoria. You loved her." Kevin had paused, choosing his words carefully. "I loved who I thought she was. But that person wasn't real. The real Victoria would have hurt us very badly. Because you were brave enough to tell the truth, she can't hurt us anymore." That conversation had been a turning point for Kevin. He stopped blaming himself for being deceived and started focusing on the fact that his family had protected him. The relationship between Kevin and Sarah had also improved dramatically. Sarah had been one of the first people to call after the wedding disaster, offering support and practical help during the legal proceedings. "I never liked Victoria," Sarah had admitted to me privately. "Something about her felt off, but Kevin was so happy that I didn't want to say anything. I should have trusted my instincts. We all should have," I'd replied. "But the important thing is that Tommy was brave enough to speak up when it mattered." Over the months, Sarah and her husband Mark had become regular fixtures at our Sunday dinners. The 4 adults had formed an unlikely but strong support network around Tommy, who thrived with all the attention and love from his extended family. Now, as I finished setting the table, I reflected on how much had changed since that awful day when I'd found Victoria's phone buzzing with messages from Marcus. Kevin was different now, more cautious certainly, but also stronger. He had learned to trust his instincts and to value the people who truly loved him. His business was thriving, partly because the media attention from Victoria's arrest had actually brought him new clients who admired his integrity and resilience. He handled it with such class, one of his new customers had told me at the grocery store. Never said a bad word about that woman, never played victim, just focused on moving forward and taking care of his son. Most importantly, Kevin had rediscovered his confidence as a father and a man. The desperate neediness that Victoria had exploited was gone, replaced by a quiet strength that came from knowing he was loved and supported unconditionally. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Tommy burst through the front door first, his baseball uniform grass-stained and his face glowing with excitement. "Grandma Carol, I got 3 hits today. Dad says that's my best game ever." Kevin followed behind him, carrying Tommy's equipment bag and grinning with pride. "He's turning into quite the athlete. I think he gets it from your side of the family." Sarah and Mark arrived a few minutes later, Sarah carrying a homemade apple pie and Mark lugging a cooler of drinks. "How did our star player do today?" Sarah asked, ruffling Tommy's hair. "I hit a triple!" Tommy announced proudly. "Coach says I might make all-stars if I keep practicing." As we settled around the dinner table, passing dishes and catching up on the week's events, I marveled at how normal and peaceful it all felt. This was what family was supposed to be. People who loved each other unconditionally, who supported each other through difficulties, who celebrated each other's successes. "Mom," Kevin said as we were clearing the dinner dishes, "I have something to tell you." My heart skipped a beat. After everything we'd been through, unexpected announcements still made me nervous. "I've been thinking about dating again," he said quietly, so Tommy wouldn't overhear from the living room where he was playing video games with Mark. Sarah and I exchanged glances. This was the first time Kevin had mentioned any romantic interest since Victoria's arrest. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. Kevin smiled, and it was the first genuinely carefree expression I'd seen on his face in months. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also hopeful. There's a teacher at Tommy's school, Mrs. Patterson. She's been divorced for a few years, has 2 kids of her own. We've been talking at school events, and she seems real, genuine, not trying to be anything other than who she is." "Have you asked her out?" Sarah asked. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to all of you first, especially Tommy. He's been through enough upheaval." I reached over and squeezed Kevin's hand. "Tommy wants you to be happy. We all do. But this time you don't have to rush into anything. Take your time. Get to know her gradually. Trust your instincts. And maybe," Sarah added with a gentle smile, "let your family meet her early in the process. We're pretty good at spotting red flags." Kevin laughed, and it was the sound I'd been waiting to hear for 6 months. "Actually," he said, "I was thinking of asking her and her kids to join us for Tommy's birthday party next month. Nothing formal, just a casual way for everyone to meet." "That sounds perfect," I said. Later that evening, after Sarah and Mark had gone home and Tommy was in bed, Kevin and I sat on my front porch with cups of tea, watching the sunset. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found those text messages?" Kevin asked. I considered the question. I try not to, but yes, sometimes I think about it. Victoria and Marcus would have disappeared with your money and left you facing federal charges. Tommy might have lost his father. Your business would have been destroyed. I would have lost everything, Kevin said quietly. Everything that actually matters. But you didn't. And now you know what real love looks like. The kind that protects you even when it's hard, even when it means making painful choices. Kevin was quiet for a moment, then said, "I used to think love meant never questioning someone, never doubting them, just accepting everything they said and did. Victoria taught me that wasn't love. It was willful blindness. Real love sometimes means asking hard questions," I agreed. "It means caring enough about someone to risk their anger if it means protecting them from harm. Like you did for me." I nodded. "Like I did for you. Like Tommy did for you. Like Sarah did when she supported you through the aftermath, even though it would have been easier to stay out of it." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The discovery of Victoria's deception had been devastating, but it had also been a gift. It had shown us what we meant to each other, how far we were willing to go to protect the people we loved. "Mrs. Patterson seems lovely," I said, returning to our earlier conversation. "But Kevin, promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you'll remember your worth. You're not a man who needs to be grateful that someone loves you. You're a man who deserves to be loved for exactly who you are, flaws, past mistakes, and all." Kevin turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw not just my son, but a man who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "I promise, Mom. And I promise something else, too. I'll never again shut out the people who truly love me in favor of someone who's just pretending to." 6 months ago, I had stood in a church and watched my son's world explode. I had been the one to light the fuse, knowing it would cause him pain, but believing it was necessary to save him. Now, sitting on my porch with my son beside me and my grandson sleeping safely upstairs, I knew I had made the right choice. Victoria's lies had been exposed, her crimes had been punished, and my family had emerged stronger than ever. The envelope Tommy had read that day had contained evidence of betrayal and deception, but it had also contained something more powerful: proof that love, real love, means protecting the people you care about, no matter the cost. As I locked up the house and prepared for bed, I thought about Tommy's upcoming birthday party, about meeting Mrs. Patterson and her children, about the possibility of new beginnings built on a foundation of hard-won wisdom. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain but full of promise, and this time, we would face it together, armed with the knowledge that the bonds between us were strong enough to survive anything. Victoria had tried to destroy my son with lies and manipulation. Instead, she had given us the greatest gift of all: the unshakable certainty that our love for each other was real, tested, and true. The envelope had served its purpose. The truth had set us all free.